Wind howled through the valley. Not a steady wind, not the kind soldiers ignore. This one changed direction without warning. It screamed across the rocks, then vanished, then came back harder. Boots slipped on loose gravel, packs shifted, metal clanged against metal. "Hold the line," someone shouted. The sound disappeared into the terrain. Dust rose in sudden bursts, visibility dropped, shapes blurred. The path ahead twisted between ridges that all looked the same. Maps were unfolded. They didn't match. A squad moved forward to check the pass. They didn't come back. Radios crackled. Static. Then a voice. "Wrong route, Cliffs, can't see the..." Silence. The column stopped. Men turned in every direction trying to recognize landmarks, but there were none, only steep walls of stone, narrow cuts, shadows that hid distance and depth. A vehicle tried to turn around. The ground collapsed under its weight. The engine roared once. Then nothing. The wind returned, louder now, carrying dust and echoes. Commands were shouted, repeated, lost. Another unit moved to the left flank. Minutes later, distant gunfire echoed from somewhere above. Or below. No one could tell. Where is the enemy? No answer. Because no one had seen them. The terrain twisted sound, twisted distance, twisted direction. Units began to separate. Small groups moved on their own, trying to find higher ground, trying to find the road, trying to find each other. Some climbed. Some descended. Some vanished behind ridgelines and were never seen again. Night came early in the narrow valley. Cold air settled fast. Radios failed one by one. Flares were fired. Their light revealed only rock and shadows that moved like traps. A final transmission broke through the static. Breathing heavy, panicked. "We're surrounded, but there's no one here." Then silence. The wind kept moving. The valley kept its secrets. And somewhere in that darkness, an entire army realized something terrifying. They weren't fighting the enemy anymore. They were fighting the land. So how did trained soldiers, with maps, radios, and command behind them, walk straight into a battlefield the terrain had already won? Dawn arrived quietly. No gunfire, no engines, no movement. Just wind moving across empty positions. Observation teams climbed the ridges expecting to see regrouped units below. Instead, they saw abandoned equipment. Rifles leaned against rocks. Packs scattered along narrow paths. Vehicles stuck at impossible angles, some half buried in loose soil. One transport sat alone at the base of a slope, doors open, engine cold. Inside, helmets remained on the seats. But there were no soldiers. Radio operators called unit after unit. Alpha Company, respond. Silence. Second platoon, confirm position. Static. They switched frequency, checked batteries, repeated call signs. Nothing. Search teams were sent into the valleys. They moved slowly, marking their route to avoid getting lost themselves. The terrain that had swallowed the army now threatened the rescuers. Footprints appeared, then disappeared in shifting dust. Boot marks led toward cliff edges. Some stopped abruptly. A ridge revealed the remains of a temporary defensive position. Sandbags, ammunition boxes, an empty radio. The antenna was still standing. No one was there to use it. Further down, a line of equipment suggested a retreat, but there were no signs of combat, no shell craters, no destroyed weapons. Just absence. One search team reported hearing voices carried by the wind. They followed the sound for nearly an hour. It led nowhere. Medical teams established collection points, expecting wounded. None arrived. Command posts began building lists. Missing. then more missing, then entire units unaccounted for. Supply officers counted vehicles. Dozens were gone. Recon aircraft flew overhead. From the air, the landscape looked calm, empty, undisturbed. But scattered across miles of broken terrain were signs of sudden abandonment: gear, maps, personal items, even unopened rations. Something had caused disciplined soldiers to stop thinking as units, to separate, to disappear. And the strangest part wasn't what was found. It was what wasn't. No clear battlefield. No mass casualties. No enemy formations. Just silence. By the second day, commanders stopped asking where the units were. They began asking something else. What had happened out there? The operation had been planned during a period of pressure. The war had entered a phase where speed mattered more than caution. Commanders were expected to move quickly, secure territory, and maintain momentum. Delays were considered dangerous. The region itself held strategic value. It controlled access to supply routes, observation points, and natural defensive positions. Whoever controlled the high ground could monitor movement across a wide area. But there was a problem. The terrain was poorly understood. Most available maps were outdated. Some were based on aerial photography taken years earlier. Seasonal changes had altered riverbeds. Landslides had reshaped slopes. Pathways used by locals didn't appear on military charts. Intelligence reports mentioned difficult conditions. They were noted, then set aside. Higher command believed the area was lightly defended. Enemy presence was expected to be minimal. The main challenge, according to planners, would be speed and coordination. The assigned force was large enough to move confidently. Mechanized units, infantry columns, support vehicles, communication teams. Everything required for a rapid advance. Weather forecasts predicted stable conditions. Visibility was expected to be clear. Movement began early. At first, progress seemed smooth. Units reported steady advancement through initial checkpoints. Command received routine updates. Then the landscape began to change. Roads narrowed into rough tracks. Tracks disappeared into dry riverbeds. Elevation increased sharply. Movement slowed, but orders remained the same. Continue forward. The area had another characteristic rarely mentioned in formal briefings. It distorted perception. Distances appeared shorter than they were. Echoes carried sound across unexpected directions. Ridges blocked line-of-sight communication. Magnetic interference in certain zones affected compasses and vehicle navigation. Local guides had warned about the region. Their advice was considered unnecessary. After all, modern equipment, trained officers, and detailed planning were believed to be enough. There was also pressure from above. The operation was part of a larger timeline. Other units depended on this advance. Supply chains had already been adjusted. Air support windows were scheduled. Stopping to reassess was not part of the plan. And so the force entered deeper into a landscape that did not behave like any training environment. At headquarters, the operation still looked successful. Reports showed forward movement. No major resistance. No heavy combat. But one detail began appearing more frequently in transmissions. Terrain slowing movement. Then another. Route unclear. Then a third. Request clarification on position. The land was becoming a factor. But no one yet understood how dangerous that factor would become. Among the advancing units was a reinforced infantry battalion. Its soldiers were experienced but not elite. Most had completed standard training, followed orders well, and operated effectively within structured command. They trusted procedure. They trusted maps. They trusted the chain of command. The battalion's daily routine rarely changed. Early wake-up, equipment checks, radio tests, movement orders. During the advance, discipline remained tight. Units moved in formation. Checkpoints were logged. Timings were recorded. The commanding officer believed strongly in order. No unnecessary risks. No deviation without authorization. But even within a disciplined force, individuals noticed things. A squad leader remarked that the terrain felt wrong. Distances between ridges didn't match the map scale. A driver reported that a marked route led directly into a dry ravine with no exit. A radio operator noted intermittent signal loss in certain areas. Each issue was reported. Each was acknowledged. Then movement continued. Morale remained steady at first. The soldiers believed the difficult terrain meant the enemy would struggle as well. Some even assumed the area's isolation made contact unlikely. Conversations during rest breaks reflected cautious optimism. Once we clear the pass, it'll open up. Probably no one out here anyway. But fatigue grew. Movement through broken terrain required constant climbing, lifting, adjusting loads. Vehicles overheated. Fuel consumption increased. And the environment itself began to affect them. Sound carried strangely. Voices echoed from unexpected directions. At night, temperatures dropped sharply. Visibility after sunset became dangerously limited. Still, the structure held. Orders came. Positions were confirmed. Routes were followed. The battalion continued forward, trusting that every other unit was doing the same. None of them knew that the distance between units was slowly growing. None of them knew that some companies had already taken different paths. None of them knew that the terrain was separating them, quietly, steadily, and completely. The first real warning came through a routine report. A company failed to reach its checkpoint on time. At first, it didn't seem serious. Delays were expected in difficult terrain. Command requested an update. No response. Radio operators tried multiple frequencies. Static. A second company was ordered to confirm their position and establish visual contact. They reported something unusual. They were exactly where the map indicated. But the landscape didn't match. A ridge shown on the chart didn't exist. A valley appeared where none was marked. Command issued revised coordinates. The correction made things worse. Now multiple units reported being off position, even though each believed they were following orders correctly. Navigation teams began relying on visual landmarks. But the terrain repeated itself, similar rock formations, identical ridgelines, narrow passes that looked the same from every direction. Meanwhile, communication grew unstable. Signals faded behind ridges. Transmission delays increased. Some messages arrived out of order. Others never arrived at all. Then came a more troubling report. One platoon had followed engine noise for nearly 30 minutes, believing they were approaching a friendly convoy. When they reached the source, there was nothing there. The sound had been carried by the wind from miles away. Night movements became dangerous. Shadow and depth were hard to judge. One vehicle overturned after driving onto what appeared to be solid ground. It was loose rock over empty space. Still, higher command saw no enemy engagement. No combat losses. No clear threat. Orders remained unchanged. Maintain advance. Maintain schedule. Maintain direction. But inside the units, confidence began to weaken. Squad leaders double-checked bearings. Drivers slowed movement. Radio operators repeated every transmission twice. And then, just before the main incident, one message reached battalion command. It was short, uncertain. Request confirmation. Are we the only unit in this valley? No one realized it yet. But by that moment, the battalion wasn't moving as a single force anymore. It was already breaking apart. Movement began before sunrise. The plan was simple. Multiple companies would converge through separate routes and regroup beyond the high ground. At first, the operation appeared routine. Engines started. Columns advanced. Radio checks confirmed movement. Then the terrain intervened. One route narrowed into a steep descent that vehicles could not climb back from. Another path ended at a cliff edge hidden by loose soil. Units attempted reroutes. Each adjustment created more separation. Radio traffic increased. Confirm position. Say again your location. Unable to identify landmark. Then weather shifted. Wind intensified, pushing dust into the air. Visibility dropped. Compass readings fluctuated. Vehicle navigation systems began showing inconsistent coordinates. By mid-morning, companies were no longer aware of each other's exact positions. One infantry group climbed toward a ridge to re-establish visual contact. At the top, they saw movement below. They believed it was a friendly unit. They moved toward it. It was their own tracks from earlier. Meanwhile, another company descended into a narrow valley, expecting to meet support vehicles. The valley twisted sharply. Radio signal vanished. Attempts to climb out failed due to loose rock. They moved forward instead. Hours later, they were deeper and more lost. Command attempted to halt movement. The order did not reach everyone. Some units stopped. Others continued. Some turned back. Others changed direction entirely. Sound made the situation worse. Engine noise echoed across distances. Shouted command seemed to come from multiple directions. Several squads reported hearing gunfire. Search teams moved toward the sound. No contact was found. By afternoon, the battalion no longer existed as a coordinated force. It had become dozens of isolated groups moving through hostile terrain without clear direction. Then the final phase began. Weather dropped rapidly. Temperature fell. Wind increased. Dust turned into a cold haze. Radios began failing as batteries drained faster in the cold. One by one, transmissions stopped. A final series of fragmented messages reached command. No route out. Cannot climb back. Water low. Request extraction. Then silence. Night came. No lights. No signals. No movement detected from aerial observation. The terrain had done what no enemy had managed. It had swallowed the battalion. By morning, entire companies were gone. No confirmed locations. No coordinated survivors. Just scattered equipment. And miles of empty land. The military response began immediately. Search and recovery teams were deployed with strict movement protocols. Every route was marked. Every team carried extra communication equipment. Helicopter reconnaissance expanded across the region. From above, patterns began to emerge. Abandoned vehicles clustered near dead-end routes. Footpaths led into areas with no exit. Some groups were eventually located, exhausted, dehydrated, disoriented but alive. Their accounts shared the same themes. Maps didn't match reality. Sound created false direction. Ridges blocked communication. Many believed other units were nearby when they were actually miles apart. But many soldiers were never found. Official reports described the event as a navigation failure under extreme terrain conditions. Privately, investigators noted deeper problems. Planning assumptions had ignored environmental risk. Local knowledge had been dismissed. Movement speed had been prioritized over terrain control. Several operational documents were later restricted. Radio logs contained gaps. Some position reports were missing entirely. The final loss numbers were never publicly detailed in full. What remained on record was incomplete. A large force had entered the region. Only fragments returned in organized form. The rest were listed as missing, recovered later in small groups, or never located. The investigation ended with procedural changes. Improved terrain analysis. Mandatory local guidance. Reduced movement speed in unknown environments. But among those involved, one conclusion remained unspoken. The army had not been defeated by an enemy force. It had been defeated by confidence in maps that did not match reality. Today the region looks quiet. Wind still moves through the ridges. Dust still shifts across the narrow paths. From a distance, the landscape appears empty. Peaceful. But beneath that calm lies a memory the land has never given back. An army entered with structure, planning, and confidence. It expected resistance from an enemy. Instead, it faced something harder to fight. Distance that lied. Sound that misled. Ground that changed without warning. And silence that grew with every mile. The soldiers who walked into that terrain followed orders, trusted their training, and moved forward believing they were part of something larger. Many never saw that larger force again. Their disappearance left no single battlefield. No decisive moment. Only scattered traces and unanswered reports. Military doctrine remembers the lessons. Maps are checked more carefully. Terrain is studied more deeply. Local knowledge is respected. But the story itself remains incomplete. Because even today, there are names listed without final locations. Units recorded without confirmed timelines. Messages that ended mid-transmission. The land remains unchanged. The silence remains. And the question that still lingers is this. If the enemy had never fired a shot, how many armies have already been defeated by the ground beneath their feet? What do you think really happened out there? Share your theory below.